So we have a Redditor with two powerful possibilities for a main character, one an angel, one a vampire, but they're not sure which to choose. Let's see if we can help them decide, bestie, on this episode of the StoryPod podcast. Come on in, bestie. Welcome to StoryPod, where we do the doing of story development together. Brought to you by Creative BFF. Hello. Obviously, we're in a little bit of a different situation than we usually meet in. And it's also an after work, weeknight after work special. Okay, a little cozy. All right. And I'm trying to see if not having to set up a green screen allows me to do more recording. Basically, that's what we're trying to do. But, I want something like semi-mildly interesting for the background. So I was like, let's get some LED lights. Throw it in there. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, forgive me. It's a little after work delulu. But listen, we're still here. My name is Ashley. I am your intrepid hostess for this episode and for this podcast in general. I am a story coach. If you are in need of story coaching, or if you have a question that I can answer here for your story on this podcast, please feel free to shoot me an email at ash@creativebff.com. You can go to I had to remember, is that my email? You can go to my website, creativebff.com, and shoot me a message in the contact section, or you can go to my Instagram. I feel like that might be a really good place actually to send me a message, because those pop up for me to see, and that is your_creative BFF. I'm pretty sure that's the username, but it should be in the description down below. Anyway, let's get to this question. Now, we are again doing a Reddit question, because answering story questions is like my favorite thing to do. And you and I have not gotten in contact yet. What are you waiting for? Let's get your story popping. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, until that point of us meeting, let's go ahead and read this question. It's a little bit of a long one because they give quite a bit of detail. So just sit back, relax. I was like, is it sit backs or is it sit back? Sit back and relax as I read this question for you. So the poster is, I just lost it. The poster is Big Extension 2296 on the r/fantasy writers subreddit. And their question is, hello everyone, how are you? I'm going through creative indecision on a project I've been working on for a long time, and I'd really like some help from you, experienced readers and writers. I'm trying to decide between two central characters to be the symbolic and emotional core of my story, and both have strong arcs of redemption, spirituality, and mythic power. Therefore, I wanted to briefly explain the lore of each and ask for your honest opinion on which character resonates the most, both in narrative potential and symbolic impact. The first is Metatron, a character who started out as an ordinary man, but went through an intense trajectory of rise, fall, and redemption. After countless mistakes, losses, and learning, he was elevated to the heavens and became the supreme archangel with power over light and darkness, directly serving the creator as a bridge between the divine and the earthly. He represents redemption as responsibility, and his figure is mystical, cosmic, and full of spiritual symbolism. He's basically some sort of celestial Superman, LOL. The second is an authorial version of Dracula from VHD, Vampire Hunter D by Hideyuki Kikuchi. In this universe, he is not only the first vampire, but an entity that has existed before creation. A seemingly angelic figure who fell out of pride or love or choice and created the nobles/vampires. But even though he has walked paths of darkness for millennia, he deeply regrets and sacrifices himself for his children and the world. His redemption is emotional, ancestral, linked to pain and memory. It is dark, melancholic, and powerful, a symbol of the soul that, even marked by darkness, can still shine. In short, he is the vampire king, but he is also a kind of fallen archangel who has existed since before time and space, but after eons, he finally repented of his actions and redeemed himself with humanity. Being the first vampire, in his case, was a consequence of his expulsion from heaven. My question is, which of the two has more symbolic and dramatic strength as a central character? I know they are powerful archetypes and each one has its own narrative beauty, but I wanted to hear from you. Which of these figures do you feel has the most depth, power, or originality, or which would you prefer to see in a dark, spiritual fantasy work? I have tried. I'm genuinely seeking advice from other writers and readers to help me find clarity between these two symbolic characters. So, very interesting sounding characters, and I'm going to cut right to the chase. The one that I think this writer actually wants to write about is the vampire character, and that is because of the amount of detail and character growth and the type of character arc that they have already developed for this character. And now it might just be in the way that they have described the two. Perhaps they left out details for Metatron that may make Metatron have equal weight and potential as the protagonist. But right now, the character that seems the most well-rounded and most loved by this writer is the vampire character. They've obviously put a lot of thought into his arc, and what it feels like as I'm reading this is the Metatron character feels like a side character in the vampire's story. And I think that could be very cool, and I think that would be a very interesting thing because they both basically, okay, so Metatron starts out as a man. Like, listen, Metatron's story, that's interesting, as you know, but there's not as much growth. There's not as much of an arc. There's not as much interest in this celestial Superman. Superman, I feel like, is kind of a challenging character to write and make interesting, and you have to do a lot of work. But this flawed vampire character, I'm looking at the question, like, he goes from this kind of angelic angel figure. Now, it could very well be, like, I'm starting to see the connections potentially of how this story could play out using both of these characters, but the vampire being the main character, like, they both could have been, like, in heaven at some point, because we have obviously Metatron being a human who ascends to the rank of, like, a supreme archangel, and then we have this vampire who was they say seemingly angelic, but you could actually make this an angel. And so they could have been in heaven at the same time. Perhaps there was some kind of conflict that did cause, like, listen, Metatron could have caused vampires fall, you know? That could be very interesting. You know, they could be enemies. They could have been friends. Maybe the vampire, when he was an angel, actually helped Metatron. Listen, the story is popping in my mind. Actually helped Metatron on his rise to now becoming the Supreme Archangel. Maybe Metatron unseated and usurped the vampire's role, the vampire's throne, or perhaps the vampire did something. Sorry for the odd edit. I accidentally pressed a button on my keyboard that caused the recording to stop. But here we are. We're back. Okay. Picking right back up. Maybe the vampire did something that caused his own fall. So the asker of the question says maybe it was pride or love or just a choice. Whatever caused the vampire to fall from his place of grace in heaven, maybe then Metatron took his place. Metatron could have been one of his, proteges, right? Okay. And then when the vampire did whatever he did, Metatron decided not to follow. So that in itself could have been like a little betrayal. And he rose and took the place and became the supreme archangel while the vampire fell to Earth and, you know, started having an Earth experience. You know what I'm saying? So even though there is a, what was I even about to say? The sentence just left my brain. I feel like they can be in the same story, but the character that seems to have the most growth and the most interesting story arc, narrative, plot, whatever, I think is the vampire. And I think that that's the one that the asker of the question really wants to write about. But I definitely resonate with this question because I am writing a book with one of my friends, and today we were doing some brainstorming and we started just fleshing out what was supposed to be a side character, minor villain who has a redemption arc. And the fleshing out that we did for this character actually is making her like one of my favorite characters in the book. I'm like, bro, do we need to like do a book about this character? Like, it just about this character? Like, should we switch who the main character is? Like, because I'm like low-key, high-key feeling what we're doing here. But I feel like this can be a very common thing that happens when you start fleshing out another character and you're giving them all this great backstory. It feels like the weight in your mind flips to now this person being the main character. And so now the goal, like, for example, if the poster of this question wanted to actually make Metatron the main character, you could definitely do that. I think it would be very, very interesting. I think he has the possibility of being a very interesting character, but we would have to give him more depth. We have to give him some flaws. We have to give him a goal to achieve, some kind of conflict that happens in his story. Like, for example, if we're kind of staying in the same kind of plot structure of, or like the backstory, rather, not plot structure, but the backstory between the vampire and him. If we're focusing on Metatron, maybe the vampire now is wanting to come back and get his place back in the hierarchy. And what does that look like? And so now there's a battle going on, right? But I do think that in this case, my vote is going to be for the vampire, but you let me know what you would think. I mean, let me think. Is there anything substantive, anything else that I can say about this? This is just kind of like a little quickie. It's just answering the poster's question with my opinion, because they really gave this one character a lot more development. So, TLDR, for my benefit and yours, my answer is going to be the vampire, because it very much seems that based on the amount of depth and backstory and the character arc that the poster has set up for the vampire character, it seems like that would be, number one, the more interesting character to follow. And it also seems like that might be the one that they really want to write about. But they also have this other really cool character, Metatron, who has a cool backstory, and they really like, you know, kind of what they were doing for that character, the angel character. But there's just not enough development of this character to make them an interesting main character at this point. They could be like, you know, there's always a way, you know what I'm saying? But right now, if it's just as it's written, Metatron the angel seems like a side character, or perhaps an antagonist in the vampire's story. But that's just my opinion. Based on what's written here. Now, do I think Metatron could be interesting? Would I like to read a story about this particular type of human guy who rose to the rank of being an angel? I think that could be very interesting. But based on what we have here, it's going to be the vampire for me. What do you think though, bestie? How would you answer this question? Do you have any characters that are competing for, the top spot? Are they coming for each other's number one spot? And how are you going about choosing between those two, if in fact you have to make a choice? Or even if you have more than two, your 2 or 3 or 4 possible main characters, who are you voting off the island and why? But anyway, listen, thank you for joining me for this little impromptu, cozy midweek. It's not going to be midweek for you when you see this video, but it's midweek for me as I'm recording it. With a new little background situation, you know what I'm saying? Love you as always. Have a great evening. Sleep well. Make sure you tuck in nice and early so that you get your 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Turn off this phone, turn off these blue lights, read a real book so that you can fall asleep and sleep well. And I'll see you next week, bestie. Bye.